All right, Shalom. I want to start out by giving our praise, honor, and glory due to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakak Wadash. I'd like to give double honors unto the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone who I learned this truth from. And I'd like to say peace and salutations unto the hopefully elect. And today is Monday, August 24th, 2026, Missile Monday. And I have this article from Newsweek, and it says Ukraine and Iran wars expose the flaws in nuclear deterrence. Opinion. So I'm just going to go into this article and bring out a few scriptures. Lord willing, this lesson is edifying and straight to the point. And it says, in recent weeks, Ukraine has been striking targets deep inside Russia with large-scale drone attacks and long-range missiles. Some commentators in Western media have hailed Ukraine for beginning to turn the tide. Whether that turns out to be correct, we can only wait and see. The momentum in wars can swing back and forth. But one thing this does reveal is that Ukraine is not being deterred by Russia's nuclear arsenal, and clearly they are, because again, this is why, if Ukraine isn't nuclear armed, but they do have missiles. But understand that, Russia could literally end the war with Ukraine right now because they possess nuclear weapons, But doing that would be detrimental because, again, Ukraine borders Russia. So in a way, Russia would be bombing itself if it were to do that, Continuing, it says it has even attacked Russian nuclear borders and early warning systems. Yet Moscow has not thankfully responded with nuclear weapons. They haven't, but still, I remember the video from, it was either early last year, if not late 2024, when Russia, retaliated against Ukraine with a non-nuclear missile that left a huge crater in the ground, man, which I think I still have the clip saved, but they can end this war, but again, there's, policies and prophecy, that is not allowing this to go full scale nuclear as of yet, So it says, speaking in 1946, the Chinese revolutionary leader Mao Zedong called nuclear weapons a paper tiger, arguing that they could not be used to fight a war to dominate other nations because they would destroy the very thing the aggressor wanted to control. And indeed, he was correct on that aspect that, these nukes, can destroy lands, because that's primarily what, another nation coming up against another nation would do, is to take over their land. So in that aspect, yes, he's correct, Says Mao later endorsed the development of a Chinese bomb, but seen through the lens of current events, his original assessment was spot on. Even policy experts who have believed in deterrence doctrine are now openly questioning it. In a recent essay in the journal Foreign Affairs, former U.S. and NATO official Rose Goddard-Moeller wrote an article called The Strange Defeat of Nuclear Deterrence that argued that countries have long assumed that the possession of nuclear weapons was the surest guarantee of their security. But Ukraine's attacks on Russia show deterrence is not working, but it is. Because again, this is why you have policies such as the, first use policy. So let's look that up real quick, because again, this is a real thing. These countries aren't just going to use weapons unless they have a legitimate reason to, and because of prophecy. you know. So this is the no first use policy. It says a no first use NFU policy. It's like a no first use NFU nuclear policy is a formal pledge by a nuclear armed state to use nuclear weapons only in direct response to a nuclear attack, right? And it gives, the overview. So the definition, a commitment never to initiate a nuclear strike or use nuclear weapons preemptively during a conflict. So again, Russia can't just, it's going to say it, but just using it as an example, but Russia can't just use nuclear weapons against Ukraine. They can, but again, they can't either. Why? The primary reason being prophecy. It says the goal to lower the risk of accidental nuclear war, reduce strategic tensions, and build international trust. And they're not going to, lower the risk of nuclear war, because again, and this nuclear war, this third world war that is coming is going to be done on purpose, not by accident. It says criticism. Opponents argue that retaining first use options is necessary for extended deterrence to protect allies from overwhelming conventional, chemical, or biological threats. And that's what Russia is to those different nations over there. Iran being one of those nations that Russia is going to be a guard unto, just like it speaks of in Ezekiel, the 38th chapter, So again, that's why it is going to list the nations that follow this policy and the ones that don't, right? So China maintains a long-standing unconditional NFU pledge, first declared in 1964, though recent debates question its absolute continuity alongside rapid arsenal modernization. India follows a NFU policy with a major exception if it reserves the right to use nuclear weapons in response to a devastating chemical or biological attacks. United States and NATO reject an NFU policy reserving the right to use nuclear weapons first in extreme circumstances to defend vital security interests in allied nations under the extended deterrence. And right, that's exactly what they're going to do. Because I'm not saying it's fact, but again, I personally believe that, once World War III, finally kicks off, that America is going to bomb back as well. Because again, the two main nuclear armed nations are America and Russia. Russia has more nukes than America, but even then, the nukes that America possesses, obviously certain of the NATO and EU countries are going to, possess them, but America is going to bomb back as well, but we'll just have to wait and see. It says other states, Russia, Pakistan, France, the United Kingdom, and North Korea do not maintain NFU policies and permit first use. Israel maintains a policy of nuclear ambiguity. So, right, just go to show you that India and China uphold the NFU policy. The U.S., NATO, and pretty much the rest of the nuclear armed nations don't, So that's why, they're saying deterrence, isn't working, but, it is, Says Gadamer attributes this failure to the changing nature of war, but history shows how nuclear weapons have consistently failed to deter. In 1973, Egypt and Syria attacked Israel. In 1982, Argentina briefly seized the Falkland Malvinas Islands from the UK. Vietnam was not intimidated by the U.S. nuclear arsenal in their long war, nuclear-armed India and Pakistan launched conventional attacks on each other in 1999 and 2025. Says, when the world came the closest, we are aware of two nuclear war in the Cuban Slacky, because the jump just says, when the world came the closest, we are aware of two nuclear war in the Cuban crisis of 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Says it was not deterrence that prevented a nuclear conflagration. It was sheer dumb luck, in the words of former U.S. Secretary of State Dean Axon. Says the U.S., it's like the attack by nuclear-armed Israel and the U.S. on Iran is another reminder that deterrence does not work as predicted by the neat theorizations of deterrence doctrine. Tehran has not been deterred from striking back, launching conventionally armed ballistic missiles and drones against Israel and U.S. bases in the Gulf states and Jordan. It has also used its conventional forces to attack ships in the Strait of Hormuz and force the U.S. to return to the negotiating table, despite President Trump's apparent nuclear threat to end Iranian civilization in a night. As for Israel, it has relied on missile defense, not nuclear threats, against Iran's counterattacks. And again, man, they can't just use these weapons, because why? If America sends a nuke over there to Iran, then guess who's going to respond, to that attack? Russia. So again, deterrence is working. They can say it's not working, but it is. They can, send, non-nuclear missiles back and forth, but what? Once that first nuclear missile gets launched, then they're all going to get launched, man. It's going to be a chain reaction. I wouldn't be surprised if literally all of these nukes get set off at the same time or launched at the same time, simultaneously. But deterrence is working. They can say it all they want, but again, privacy is the main thing or the main reason why, this hasn't ramped up yet, So I'm just going to bring out a couple of scriptures, man, and that'll be it. Don't want to make this one too long. But I'm going to start with the book of Malachi, chapter 4 and verse 1. It says, for behold, the day cometh that shall burn as an oven, and all the proud, yea, and all that do wickedly shall be stubble. And the day that cometh shall burn them up, saith the Lord of hosts, that I shall leave them neither root nor branch. And right, what is that day that's coming that's going to burn as an oven? World War III, because this is why these nuclear weapons are on the earth today. Because they're going to serve their purpose of destroying Babylon the Great and also cleansing the earth, because the earth has to be cleansed, and America is going to be destroyed. So it's the book of Ezekiel, the book of Isaiah, chapter 9. In verse 5, it says, for every battle of the warrior is with confused noise and garments rolled in blood, but this shall be with burning and fuel of fire. And right, this coming nuclear war is going to be fought with these nuclear weapons. That's that burning and fuel of fire, man, because this isn't going to be like how traditional warfare was fought. We would have one nation of men on one side of the battlefield, up against another nation of men on the other side of the battlefield, charging each other, in the center, having different weapons of war, swords, spears, shields, bow and arrows, going at it, guerrilla warfare, if you will, until one nation is left standing. Like, no, that's not how this current world war is going to be fought. Yes, as I always make mention, you will have ground troops that are going to be going to war with each other, but this war is primarily going to be fought with these ICBMs, That's how this war is going to end once those nukes get launched. That's it, man, So let's get, while I'm still in Isaiah, let's get Isaiah chapter 54 and verse 16. It says, "Behold, I have created the smith that bloweth the coals and the fire, and that bringeth forth an instrument for his work. And I have created the waster to destroy and right." The modern day smith being these scientists and physicists that are behind creating and developing these nuclear weapons. A primary example of this would be Julius Robert Oppenheimer, aka the father of the atomic bomb, which his creation has evolved from, atomic bombs to hydrogen bombs to, nuclear missiles. Excuse me, it's like that can be flown, from one end of the earth even to the other. Which it says that in the book of Isaiah, the 13th chapter. This is the book of Isaiah, chapter 13 and verse 4. It says, "The noise of a multitude in the mountains, like as of a great people, a tumultuous noise of the kingdoms of nations gathered together. The Lord of hosts mustereth the host of the battle." And right, that tumultuous noise, the noise of a multitude in the mountains, and just like it says in the book of Joel, it's going to sound like, roughly paraphrasing what it says, but, like the sound of, horses, running. That thunderous noise is going to be those missiles, launching, man, because you're going to hear that rocket propulsion system, that jetpack, if you will, guiding these missiles to their target, man, because there's going to be thousands upon thousands of these, nuclear warheads, because the warhead is the part of the missile that actually does the damage, that are going to hit this place, America. Excuse me, Salakia. So this is verse 5. It says, "They come from a far country, from the end of heaven, even the Lord and the weapons of his indignation to destroy the whole land." And right, Russia possesses a missile, the Sarmat 2, aka the Satan 2, missile, which is probably the most powerful nuclear weapon out of all of the current nuclear armed nations, and the different nukes that they possess. That it has to be, the most powerful one, because if I'm not mistaken, and if I remember correctly, that, this nuke can fly for at least 15 hours. So it can literally, travel around the world, at least a couple times, because again, it's going to be traveling at Mach speeds, and again, Russia has tested, a Sarmat 2, which one ended up failing. But for the most part, when World War III officially kicks off, none of these missiles are going to fail. Just like it says in Joel, the 2nd chapter, that, even when they fall upon a sword, they should not be wounded. Meaning, these different, nuclear defense systems, trying to shoot down another missile or try to, steer it in a different direction. That's not going to happen. One is going to bump into another one and knock it out of the sky. They're going to bump into each other and, detonate in midair. No, they're going to hit their target, man, because the Spirit of the Lord is going to be in these nukes, which is why, nothing is going to happen to them, So I'm going to end it with this. This is the book of Revelation, chapter 9 and verse 15. It says, "And the 4 angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year, for this later third part of men. And again, this nuclear war isn't going to take place until the Lord, the Heavenly Father, is ready for it to take place. Because again, prophecy is set, there's a set time when the prophecies have to play out, but we can clearly still see the build up to this Third World War, but it has to take time. It has to play out, So that's why I said there's a particular hour, day, month, and year. There's a set time when these things are going to go down, and also, the prophecy of the mark of the beast, the RFID microchip, being made mandatory, before this war officially kicks off, And just like it says, to slay the third part of men, because you have three classes of men on the earth. You have the sons of God, which today are the biblical Israelites, you so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, the tribe of Judah, all the way down to the tribe of Issachar. You have the sons of men, which are you different heathen nations. And then you have the sons of the wicked, which are you so-called white people, the nation of Edom, the wicked man, that's who this coming destruction is for you, 2/3 of the nation of Israel are going to get caught up in this destruction, and then you heathens, you're just collateral damage, if you aren't able to return to your homeland before these nukes get launched, then, you're just over here to make a little money and die, So, Lord willing, this lesson was edifying. I want to give all praise, honor, and glory due to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakakodash. I'd like to give double honors unto the apostles and the others of Great Millstone who are learned this truth from, and I'd like to say peace and salutations unto the hopefully elect. Till next time I say, Shalom.